Good evening. Welcome back to Edible Education. Hope everyone had a good spring break. You know, every Edible Ed class is special, but this one to me is even the most special. I'll have to ask, why is tonight more special than any other night? You'll have to answer that for yourself at the end of the evening. But spring has sprung. This is the Japanese akebono cherry tree in my garden with that beautiful blue sky. One of my friends saw that photo and said, how do we describe that sky? The colors of blue in a sky. I didn't really have the answer, but I did a little scouting around and I learned that there's a scientific instrument that was created in the early 1800s, late 1700s called a cyanometer. Has anybody ever heard of that? Cyanometer? It was an instrument that would show the gradations of sky and assign them different names. And it was invented by a man named Alexander von Humboldt. Anybody heard of Humboldt? Any ecologists in the? So Humboldt was a Prussian explorer, inventor, really an adventurer. He went on ships all around the world and discovered a lot of plant species and animal species. He was really the first person to express an ecological mindset. There's a wonderful book called The Invention of Nature by Andrea Wolf, if you're so inclined to learn about von Humboldt. He's quite an inspiring character. Anyway, also tonight, you know, tonight is the night of the pink moon. This is the first full moon of spring, and it's really a magical time, a magical night. I hope you'll find enough darkness in the city light here to see the full moon. Full moon.
Can I get
Yeah.
a howl? Oh! Oh, yeah, let's hear it. Oh!
Exactly.
Get this party going here.
Now you know why it's special night. So here we are, class 11. Who remembers the very first week of class? What did we do? What did we do? How did we start? What? Raisins. We had raisins, and we learned about the system in a raisin and how to eat mindfully. This is known as bud break. Bud break, the break of the bud. This just happened in the last day or two. These are grapevines. These are actually wild California grapevines that will produce delicious grapes and raisins. And it's a time of celebration and a time of anticipation. And it's also marking for you this final sprint in the semester. And I know that means a lot of work and a lot of pressure and a lot of expectation. And then for those of you that are graduating, you're worried about where you're going to work and how you're going to get a job and all of that. But I just wanted to impart a little wisdom I learned, which is to think about this last period, this full moon, this bud break, these beautiful Japanese cherry blossoms. They're going to carry you to the finish line here of this semester, and hopefully you'll complete this part of your journey and finish strong. I guess that's something I always say to myself when I'm facing some challenges or some feeling of overwhelm, is just to think about finishing strong with integrity, with grace, retaining your cool and your friendships along the way, and being sure to take care of yourself and nourish yourself. So tonight, you know, we turned the corner a little bit from the class. You've had kind of a who's who of authorities on food systems and food systems transformation. Mas Masamoto was with us the week before spring break. He gave us that beautiful pruning demonstration that connected past to present to future. And You know, I wanted Moss to do that particular class because I like to think that farmers are really the ultimate entrepreneurs. They have to do everything. I wanted to talk a little bit about what does it mean to be entrepreneurial? What does it mean to be entrepreneurial? Anybody have any thoughts about that? Any words that come to mind? What is it? Anybody here an entrepreneur? A wantrepreneur? Yeah, sure. Yell it out from up there. Love that. Identify an opportunity that's unmet and find a way to pursue it. That's what being entrepreneurial is. Yeah. What else is being entrepreneurial? To make impact. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Who else? Don't be shy. Didn't I assign you that paper? Yeah, go ahead. To be daring, courageous. Yeah, I like that. What else? Bring others along. Love that. Yeah. One more. Vision. Yeah? Say that again. Oh, you said? Okay, thank you. I didn't know where the voice was coming from because you're way back there. It's all right. So there was a man named Joseph Schumpeter who was a economist in the 20th century, mid-20th century. He defined entrepreneurship as the reordering of Silicon Valley style entrepreneurship, where you're disrupting the system of supply. You think about Uber disrupted the system of supply of taxi cabs, right? Airbnb disrupted the supply of overnight lodging, right? Google disrupted the way you looked up information. There used to be something called the Yellow Pages. So entrepreneurs work to reorder the system of supply. I like to think more in our era that entrepreneurs need to be more to act like stewards rather than disruptors. So they have to extend the realm of care that their actions impact. And tonight we have two very special guests who each in their own way have worked on reordering the system of value. And what I mean by value is how value is created in a system, how it's captured in a system, and how it's distributed in a system. So a lot of our capitalistic intent in terms of reordering the system of value is to move that value to the shareholders or the investors. And if you read progressive economists, they'll talk about that. They talk about the investor class, and so much value has moved, say, from workers to owners. That's kind of the historical precedent. We just had, two major labor issues resolved at UC Berkeley in the last year, where more resources in the system of value that's created at the university were redistributed to graduate student instructors and lecturers. So this is always a dynamic, fluid system, but entrepreneurs can think about creating business models. Business model is effectively a way of organizing the relationships and agreements in a system to distribute value in ways that they feel are appropriate and equitable. And so our guests tonight, I feel, are two exemplars of that. When you listen to their presentations tonight, and what we're going to do is Okra is going to speak first, and then Paul will follow him, and then we'll sit down in conversation with you, and I hope you'll have lots of questions. But I want you to listen in particular tonight as they tell you their stories about just to think about in what ways does food systems entrepreneurship, being an entrepreneur in a food system, differ from, regular entrepreneurship, tech entrepreneurship, or Silicon Valley winner-take-all entrepreneurship? How is it different? What are the values that are coming through? What are the operational structures or approaches that are being used to, again, capture and distribute value in more equitable ways? So tonight, we're really fortunate to have with us two visionary graduates of this institution. Okra Kyser is here, and at the suggestion of Moe, our student Moe Sumino in the class, it was her idea to bring Okra. I'm getting to meet him for the first time. He graduated, 5 years ago, or 2018? Yeah, 5 years already. And then Paul Rice, who is the founder and CEO of Fair Trade USA, and a dear friend and a graduate of the MBA program here at Berkeley, is here to join you. He's also a great howler, in case you didn't notice that. But I'm going to set up Okra's slides and turn this over to you. Give me 1 second while I do this. Here you go.
Okay, what's up, everybody? What's going on? How y'all doing? Can I get
Good.
like a woo woo? Talk with the hat on, so I feel self-conscious about it, but I was farming all day and my hair is kind of messed up. So I'm gonna leave the hat on while I talk to you. But okay, so my name is Okra. I'm from Sacramento, California, born and raised out there. But also I lived in the Bay for a while as a kid and lived in Marin County for a minute. My dad had a t-shirt shop in Berkeley growing up. I was always back and forth to the Bay, and particularly Berkeley. So I've spent a lot of time here as an adult and then also as a child. But yeah, I'm a conservation and resource studies alumni, class of 2018. I'm the farm manager currently at Tequayana Warep Farm in San Gregorio with the Deep Medicine Circle. So this first picture right here, I just had a birthday party. I just turned 27 recently, but this picture right here we were cooking butternut squash and chiles and a bunch of other stuff on the fire. That's one of my favorite ways to cook and prepare food, is just cooking over an open fire pit with people that I love. And so I think that's a really important grounding steps in situation here, and just trying to remain grounded in the earth and remaining grounded in the elements that we're working with on a day-to-day basis. So, and these are some leeks that we grew this winter and harvested and sent out to different organizations in Oakland. So before I get started with the presentation, I just wanted to do a land acknowledgement for the ancestors of this land. We're in Huchin, we're in the stolen village of Huchin right now with the Ohlone people, the Chochenyo speaking Ohlone people, and all of their ancestors are with us here, and they're here with us. Their bones are actually in the hearse, stolen bones and artifacts and stuff. So I just want to pay homage to them and all of these other folks in the area that we know as the Bay and the Monterey Bay also. So we got the Monterey Bay below, and then we see the San Francisco Bay above. So if you see Half Moon Bay right there, that's kind of where I'm at. That's kind of where the farm is at. So it's a little bit south of Half Moon Bay near Santa Cruz. So that's where I came up from today. And so it's me, right? It's me. This is kind of has been my journey and pathway, right? So I started out as a student in the genetics and plant biology department. So I started as a scientist. I started taking organic chemistry classes, Chem 1A, Chem 3A, all of those courses, thinking that I wanted to do cannabis work, right? So my goal coming to Berkeley was I wanted to develop my own strains of cannabis. I wanted to be like the dopest cannabis grower on earth, right? So I was like, you know what, Mom, I'm gonna be a botanist. Like, she was like, okra, there's no jobs there. And I was like, Mom, it's good. Like, don't worry about it. And now all people do is send me jobs. Like, all people do is send me jobs. I got this job over here. Do you want to take this job? All people do is just send me farm management, farm operation jobs all the time. So I get those on a regular basis. And then, so I started here, right? I started in the laboratory at the bottom. This is me working in a cannabis research laboratory in Berkeley. At that lab, we sequenced the genome of cannabis. So the first sequencing that ever happened was in this laboratory of the cannabis genome, right? So I come from that background, analytical chemistry, all this stuff in the laboratory, right? But I soon to realize that I was getting exposed to too many toxic chemicals while I was working there. And I'll speak later more on that when I talk about my experience as a student in the Hayes lab when I was working there with Professor Tyrone Hayes. I should have invited him. I wasn't thinking he would have pulled up. And then here, right, so as I learned more about what was going on in the science and the cannabis industry and all that stuff, in the food industry and what was happening, I was like, you know what, I'm interested more in working outside. And I want to work with the earth, and I want to work with the people. I want to be outside with the plants and all of that. So this is me on a delegation to Venezuela in January 2020, right before the pandemic. So I was out there with a group called Pueblo a Pueblo, who does free food distribution and low-cost food distribution in a socialist manner to a bunch of different communes, Chavista communes. I don't know if anyone knows about Hugo Chavez. So you can look up Comuna 3 de Enero and all these different communes that are in Venezuela. So I'll go here. So when I came to Cal, I was all up in the laboratories doing research and stuff like that. And this is a slide from a previous presentation that I did, but this is kind of what the energy was on. Like, they were like, oh, biological annihilation, human population is dying off, vertebrate populations are dying off, specifically anurans, lizards, reptiles, large mammals, and things like that. And that's not just because the species are getting old and stuff like that, but because of all the environmental contamination, pesticides, habitat loss, deforestation, and things that were happening, that have been happening for a while post-industrial revolution and World War II, and the creation of all these pesticides and agrochemicals and things like that, right? So this is research from Nature, NCBI, NIH, the National Institute of Health. So you can look these papers up. Stanford University is here, the Autónomo University of Mexico. So these are papers that are written, and that's one thing that I learned. I learned a lot of information literacy, media literacy, and how to actually look at papers and look at information from a critical perspective while I was a student here. So in the Hayes lab, right, so we were looking at frogs how were having their gonads and their sexual organs, male frogs, male African clawed frogs, we were looking at their organs, their gonads were being transformed from male to female, right? So as you can see here, does this have a laser at the top? Oh, here we go. Yeah. So as you can see here, this is a gonad of a frog, right? I'm not going to say it's an ovary or a testis because it has both. So as you can see, these are testes here, and then these are testes, and then you see this is a testis, label T. Label T, this is a testis. And then you can see O here, right? So in the same sexual reproductive organ, there's both testis and ovaries. And you can see that in this here too, right? So, and the chemicals, and this wasn't just happening randomly in the wild. This was happening because of this particular herbicide called atrazine, which was contaminating frogs in different watersheds and causing this transformation of their biological and biological reproductive system. So I was like, what am I going to do with this information? Like, wow, this is a lot. Like, whoa. And so I was like, well, what can I do? And what's the cause of this? What's the cause of all these problems? What's the cause of all this stuff that's happening? It's our agricultural and food system, right? Specifically contaminating watersheds, contaminating animals and things like that. So I just started gardening and farming, right, at Berkeley. So the first thing we really did was I took a class in agroecology in ESPM when Miguel Altieri was still here. Dr. Miguel, he was cool. He was my faculty mentor when I transferred my major to CRS from genetic and plant biology. So basically, we started farming on this roof at Barker, garden. I think they now took the garden out, but we had a popping decal for a minute. A couple of my friends would teach that decal with us. It was mostly focused on growing food in spots where it was hard to grow food and growing food in places that aren't farmland. It wasn't accessible. So shout out to all those people who stewarded Barker, Diego Jimenez, Will Smith, Maya Boone, everybody who taught the class, who I taught the class with. So I was doing research in Tyrone's lab and then working at Barker growing food. And at the same time, working at Oxford Tract too. So we were growing mad food at Oxford Tract, and we were just doing our thing, growing mad food and just distributing it to people for free for a while. And then after that, I'll wait a minute. But after we got it in at Oxford Tract and went in at Barker, there was a point where I graduated, right? And I was like, I had worked at the cannabis research lab for a while, and we were doing stuff, but I was really trying to do something different. I really wanted to feed people locally. I wanted to be able to grow food. I wanted to farm. A lot of my family members were farmers. My ancestors and elders were farmers in the South. A lot of my family members were sharecroppers, growing tobacco and cotton and corn and squash and stuff like that, and raising livestock, raising hogs and doing things like that in Missouri. So my dad's ancestry is from out there. So I was like, you know what? Let me make something happen. And so I graduated. I was teaching the decal, was a post-bac researcher in the Hayes lab for a minute. And then I was like, let me see what I can do. I want to start trying to sell some of this food and raise money so we can like go on these delegations and go look at different agricultural production systems in other countries. And so I went to Oxford Tract. We had planted out like maybe like 400 row feet of broccoli at that point. And then there was some food at Barker. There was a bunch of greens and lettuces and fava beans and stuff that we had grown. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna harvest this. So I harvested like maybe 100 pounds of broccoli. I harvested about like 40 pounds of collard greens, 30 pounds of lettuce. And then I was like, all right, well, what am I gonna do? And the first thing I did, I hit up Chez Panisse. And I was like, I hit up their head chef on email and through my Berkeley email. And I was like, hey, I'm a SOGA student. I just graduated from Berkeley. I was at SOGA and I'm growing this food. And these are our price lists for the food. So I sent them the price list, and the chef responded to me. And she, like within a few minutes, I was like, dang. And she responded to me within a few minutes and was like, all right, we want this many pounds of this. Like, we want this many collard greens. We want this much lettuce. And I was like, wow, like this is real. You feel me? Like this is an opportunity. This is something that I can do. And so from there, it's just, I brought the food over. They didn't want any of the broccoli, so I had this beat up Honda that I was working on and learning mechanics and stuff like that at the same time as I was doing this. So I was working on this Honda. I had this beat up Honda, and I had 100 pounds of broccoli in my trunk. I had lettuce and collard greens packed into the back seat, and I pulled up in front of Chez Panisse, and there was this like, there's a jewelry store next door to it, and it's this woman named Margot. It's called Low & Co., and she was out there with her Girl Scout troop. And they see me pop the trunk, pull the greens out, pull the broccoli out, and everybody was like, damn, well, like, what's going on here, right? And so I pulled up. They're like, hey, can we get some broccoli? Can we get this? And I walked into the back of Chez Panisse. I sold them this produce, and then I left, and I was like, wow, I'm gonna start farming. I'm about to start farming. Like, this is awesome. And so from there, it kind of just, I started this organization called Black Earth Farms. There was a bunch of different entrepreneurial things that I was doing with the land, with farming and food and growing food. And then, so basically after that, after we started the org and did all that stuff, we were selling food we were selling like a CSA box, right? But people would pay double for the CSA box, and then we would give one box away for free. And I got that idea from Tom's, where they were selling food. They were selling a pair of shoes, and then they would give a pair of shoes away for free. And I was like, all right, for sure, I'll see how that works for a while, right? So that's my journey with actual like vending food and selling food, not necessarily for a profit, but just in the entrepreneurial spirit and trying to survive and make money in an urban setting. And so as my knowledge got up and as I got more interested in food, I became more interested in a global food system and also a local food system as well. and started going on different delegations. This is a delegation I went on to Nicaragua. I just like this photo, this woman here and her child in Nicaragua. This is in Managua, and it's at the ATC headquarters, the Asociación de Trabajadores del Campo, which is a rural workers union in Nicaragua. So they're a union that's full of all rural workers all over Nicaragua who grow pitaya, cacao, café, all these different agricultural products for export and then also for local consumption. And so I was out there. That's me right there with the hat on on the side. But I like this photo because I'm not the center. I'm just like off to the side, but I'm still in it. It's cool. So yeah, that's one thing. And then, so yeah, that's kind of like, I learned the journey, and then I'll talk about more what I'm up to now after I give more in-depth analysis of what I actually have been doing entrepreneurially and then in the food system now. So does anyone from the Bay? If you raise your hand if you're from the Bay. All right, was Sacramento in the house? No Sac, but okay, for sure. So, all right, so these are the counties in the Bay. So there's, I think 9 counties, I don't remember, I forget. But, so these are the counties in the Bay. And I listed off some of their agricultural production commodities that's going on out there from my own personal experience. I didn't pull any data from this, but this is my own personal experience. Farming in Contra Costa County, I farmed in Alameda County, and I farmed in Sonoma County, and I've also farmed in San Mateo County, right? So I've had experience working on these different land sites, and I've talked to different farmers, been in the field with different farmers, and got information, campesino a campesino, right? Exchange to exchange. So this is my learned experience, information from different folks that are in the area, right? So Marin, a lot of rangeland, mixed veggies going on in Marin County. Specifically, Bolinas has a lot of stuff going on there, and the Point Reyes area, there's a lot of rangeland and cows out there. Sonoma County, grapes, rangelands, mixed veg, a lot of mixed vegetable farms and orchards and stuff like that going on in Sonoma County, olive orchards and things like that. It's also there's a lot of vineyard plantations. There's a lot of plantation dynamics going on in Sonoma County also, and I'll talk a little bit about that. How much time? What's the time? All right, for sure, 8 minutes. So this is some of that production that's going on out there. And so here's the farming in the Bay, right? What's going on out here? It's give and take being a farmer out here. It's really hard. It's really positive because the climate is really suitable for year-round cultivation. There's a lot of opportunity to grow different types of vegetables in all of the different microclimates in the Bay. And there's a lot of water availability out here as well. We have abundant watersheds that have been well taken care of, and ecosystems that are still really intact, that have a lot of water. And then there's also a lot of readily available markets for food distribution, and people are down to pay top dollar for food, right, if you're farming in a capitalist marketplace, right? But the negatives are the housing shortages out here because of the different land costs and zoning issues and extensive permitting processes that it takes to build housing, right? And so if you know about real estate development, if you know about that, what's going on, or have any idea, I feel like that's more of a field that's kind of closer to what y'all are doing in Haas, or I know this is an interdisciplinary course, but real estate development, people have a lot of problems with permitting and building and ADUs and all this type of stuff. It goes the same for housing and agricultural housing out here. And then there's also high production costs as well. The inputs for agriculture are really expensive. Livestock veterinarian services are really expensive. Compost is mad expensive. And the transport gas costs are really expensive as well. San Francisco has the highest gas and fuel costs in the whole nation. And so something that I've been really thinking about and working through is housing farmers and getting dignified housing for farmers. Something that I've struggled with as a farmer in my experience has been just like weird housing situations. I've lived in trailers, I've lived in tiny houses, I've lived in houses, I've lived in other people's houses. I've been in many different situations that are kind of like, that indicated to me that there needs to be a huge overhaul in the agricultural housing situation that's happening in the Bay Area specifically. Whereas a lot of other states and a lot of other places have individual rights to develop land and build agricultural housing in different states and stuff like that because of less or more conservative laws around housing, right? Where the individual rights of somebody to build housing is more intact, like in Vermont and New York State, Georgia, the South, all that stuff. And so right now, I work at the Deep Medicine Circle and at the Takeaway Anawadet Farm. So it's an awesome project. You should check it out. You can check you should check the website out. Check out Rupa. She's right here. Shout out to Rupa. You feel me? She's the MD and the doctor and visionary who created this model right here. So I'll talk about the farming as medicine model in the system, but this is basically what is going on in our food system right now, this diagram. And I'll talk about it more when I talk about farming as medicine. So the DMC works with farming as medicine. The first protocol is land back. So getting land back to indigenous people and inviting and gathering indigenous stewardship to be in control of these lands. Farmers are stewards of health. So farmers and people who grow food are actually health workers and people who participate in the health of our general society, because food is medicine and also food is health. Our intake of food determines sometimes our health outcomes and the quality of food as well. You know, if our food has pesticides and agrochemicals in it, then rather than organic products and things like that, and less pesticides and stuff, we're gonna have a healthier body outcome. And then decommodifying food, right? So this is my first experience as a farmer where I haven't had to sell food to survive or make a living, right? So the Deep Medicine Circle, we give away all of our food for free, and it's building infrastructure to offer food as a public service instead of as a commodity that's sold on the market. Just as street lights are provided by the city, just as all that stuff is provided by the state and government, we believe that food should also be provided like that for free. And then food is medicine, right? So policy for health-based agricultural systems and food distribution that focus on the earth and focus on the well-being of the planet as well as it is for that. So this is the farm that I work at. This is many moons ago. It looks much different now. But this is Don Antonio right here, the elder farm worker that I work with on a daily basis. This is about like maybe, I don't know how many, but it's a lot of trays of different of Asian vegetables and East Asian vegetables that we're growing out. 27% of the people that we feed are Chinese, mostly of them elders. So, and we do a food survey every few weeks, and 27, that was the highest demographic of people that we feed. So I wanted to make sure that we had food that they wanted and that they're familiar with in our crop plan. So this is what that food is going. This is a fish emulsion mix that we put on the starts before they get planted to help them with their nutrients. And then this is the rooftop medicine farm up in North Oakland. So we're farming on a rooftop as well. I don't work out there, but there are many cool people who do. And then the food system today, this is a diagram of what's happening here on the food system and how it talks about how mostly what's important here is to look at is what's leaving the system, right? Profits of farmer, ag corporation, and stuff like that. A lot of stuff is leaving the system rather than going into the food system and going into the plant. So those are some of the things, and that's the end of my presentation, but I'm happy to field more questions and talk more about it. So thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good.
Okra. I think just keep going, right?
Yeah.
And this is such a great diagram for you in the background. Yeah, take it down?
Take it down.
Okay, take it down.
Take it down, bro. Take it down.
How y'all doing? How y'all doing? Can you hear me? All right. I think I got this on. Who is feeling inspired by Okra's talk with us tonight? Who is feeling inspired to go out and change the world? Raise your hands. I want to see the hands. Who's feeling inspired to go out and change the world? So we are in a room of change makers. We're in a room of kindred spirits. And that energy is needed if we're going to save the planet and its people before it's too late. Now, I tried to get this party started a minute ago by getting y'all to join me in a good old howl at the full moon. If y'all want me to talk, I'm going to need a real howl. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Ow! All right, that's better. That's better. Feels good to be home. Spent a lot of time in this room, long time ago. who's in the room? How many undergraduates are there in the room? Raise your hand, please. Awesome. How many MBA students or other graduate students? How many of y'all are in the business program? Graduate and undergraduate. Raise your hands. Okay. Any folks from the community here that are not in school and just here to have fun? Okay. One? All right. Thank you for coming. So many business school students. Y'all were probably the ones that weren't howling. I'm not as cool as Okra or Will. I'm not a farmer. But I've had a love for farmers my whole life. My mama grew up on a farm in Oklahoma. They were poor. And they lost that farm during the Great Depression, and her daddy became a farm worker. And I grew up hearing those stories, what it was like to be a farm worker's daughter in the Great Depression and to eat cornbread and buttermilk for supper every night. So as long as I can remember, city boy me has had a strong sense of affinity and sympathy and compassion for farming folk. And I just knew from when I was little, I needed to work with farmers. So Will asked me to tell you my story tonight, and my story is one of a kid who grew up hearing about farming, to a social justice activist in college, to a Nicaraguan revolutionary, to an MBA student at Haas, to a social entrepreneur and change maker like many of y'all. That's the arc of my story. And what I hope to do by telling you my story is illuminate some of the lessons of this semester about food and entrepreneurship and the intersection of those two. So, I grew up caring about farmers. I grew up feeling a sense of indignation with social justice. I wanted to do something about it. I was an activist in college, and I knew that what I wanted to do after college was go abroad and work with farmers somewhere and fight poverty. And so at the tender age of 22, with a newly minted undergraduate degree, I went off to Nicaragua, which at that time was in the middle of a revolution. This was 1983. I fancied myself a revolutionary, so I bought a one-way ticket to go join the revolution. ATC, bro. You're in my backyard. And I thought I would stay for a year or two. I stayed for 11 years. I was 22 when I went away. I was 33 when I came home. After I got there, I quickly signed on to a project way up in the mountains in northern Nicaragua in the coffee lands. And I started working with farmers. And one of the reasons why I was attracted to Nicaragua is because they had a land reform, a process of essentially taking land from the rich and giving it to the poor. And in college, I had read a book called Food First by a woman named Frances Moore LePay and her colleague Joseph Collins. They started the Food First Institute here in Oakland. And their thesis was poverty in rural communities around the world is not a result of overpopulation, and it's not a result of low yields on farms. It's a result of a poor distribution of resources. The rural poor don't have their own land. They don't have access to credit or to other resources that they need in order to produce their own food and develop their own communities. And so we end up in generational cycles of poverty. I thought that was pretty profound. And in Nicaragua, they were redistributing land. And so I thought, well, I need to go learn from that. So that's what I went to do. I went to work with farmers in the land reform. And I spent that decade organizing co-ops. So groups of 20 to 200 farmers who would come together to share resources, land, draft animals. Oh, no, that's a cool picture. All right, I'm down with that picture.
That's my garden.
I know.
You feel at home.
I've been there. And this work was funded by all kinds of international development agencies, who were giving money to alleviate poverty in Nicaragua, and that's the model around the world. And what characterizes this model and this approach is lots of money, well-intentioned people in global cities around the world sending money to alleviate poverty, but it's a top-down model. It tends to ignore the market. It tends to focus on productivity, and it tends to rely on a technological package of chemical fertilizers and lots of pesticides and herbicides. And poor farmers in Nicaragua have to buy that. They don't have the cash to buy that, so they have to take out loans from the bank to do that. And so you get a system going which is not only destructive to the land and the people working the land because it's so chemical intensive, but then if you have crop failure and you fail to pay your loan to the bank, you can lose your land. And so I just found myself working year after year on well-intentioned projects that were in that model. And I just didn't feel like we were helping farmers develop their own capacity to solve their own problems. I felt like more often than not, we were just creating dependency on foreign aid. And we certainly weren't helping farmers tap into that entrepreneurial energy and learn how to navigate the market. We ignored the market. So I did that for 7 or 8 years, and I got really disillusioned. And then in the summer of 1990, as I was looking around for something else to do, very much by accident, I heard about these people in Europe that called themselves fair traders. Fair traders. And their slogan was simple: trade, not aid. Trade, not aid. And that was their philosophy. Farmers don't need our aid. They don't want our charity. They just want a fair price for their harvest. And I was kind of blown away because I'd never met a farmer who wanted or needed aid. They just wanted a decent return for all their hard work. So, long story short, I ended up starting Nicaragua's first fair trade co-op in the summer of 1990. 20 brave souls, very small coffee farmers, 1-2 acres each, came together, pooled their coffee. We found a mill who would mill it for us. We shipped it to a fair trade buyer who paid us $1.25 a pound at a time when the local market price was 10 cents a pound. After costs, because we had to mill it, we had to ship it, after costs we had about $1 a pound for farmers versus 10 cents a pound that their neighbors were getting down the road. So a 10x increase in income. Just to put this into context, most of our farmers, again, 1 or 2 acres, 2,000 pounds was the average harvest volume for the year. So 2,000 pounds times 10 cents, man, they were looking forward to getting $200 total cash income for the year. Not even $1 a day. Instead, we got them $1 a pound. Most of them received $2,000 that year. None of them had ever seen that much money before in their lives. And it was transformational. And I was a pretty popular boy that summer. I became Pablo $1. $1 Paul, because that was my mantra. Join the co-op and we'll get you $1 a pound. We grew that co-op to 3,000 families over the next couple of years, all over northern Nicaragua. And built a multi-million-dollar coffee export co-op that was owned by the farmers. So farmers that, were maybe had never been to school and maybe only had an acre or two of land, but by coming together and standing shoulder to shoulder with their neighbors, they were able to build a viable, competitive international export business that generated tremendous wealth for them and their families and tremendous impact for the environment. So what did we do with all the extra money? I mean, we were selling to fair trade in Europe, and fair trade began in Europe, and it was big in Europe at the time. There was nothing happening in the US. There was really no fair trade movement here. So we were selling to fair trade buyers in Europe, and as a result of all this extra money, we did extraordinary things. We helped the farmers eat 3 times a day. And I say that's extraordinary because many farmers around the world skip meals, especially during the lean months, 6 months after harvest, because their money's gone and resources are short. We help farmers eat. We help farmers stay on the land instead of having to immigrate. We help farmers dig wells. We dug wells in villages and brought clean drinking water into villages for the first time. And you know what's remarkable about is that you know the number one cause of death for children under the age of 5 in most of the developing world is due to gastrointestinal diseases caused by either dirty water or dirty food. So if you clean up the water supply, you save lives. We saved lives. We built schools, we set up scholarship programs, we built health centers, we developed women's empowerment programs where basically women could borrow microloans and start their own businesses. We reforested hillsides that had been deforested a generation earlier by international lumber companies. We started the country's first Nicaragua's first organic certification program, and most of our farmers went organic. And now, you know, everyone's talking about regenerative. Our farmers were regenerative without knowing the term. They preserved the soil, they planted cover crops, they preserved the canopy over the coffee. They were the most eco-friendly farmers that I've ever met in my life. And they knew the importance of saving the land for future generations. The economic incentive of an organic premium supported that. But our farmers knew that they were the stewards of the land. They felt it. We did all this extraordinary stuff, y'all, and here's the punchline, thanks to nobody's charity, right? Thanks to no one's international development aid. It was all done through this simple concept of a fair price for a great product. And so, of course, then, you know, the invisible dividend out of all of this, what excited me the most as a wannabe revolutionary was the empowerment of families, the empowerment of farmers, the hope and pride and dignity and self-reliance of people who are changing their lives and their communities for themselves rather than waiting for someone to come in and do it for them. Empowerment in our movement is kind of an overused term, and a lot of people don't know what the hell that is, but that's what it is. It's hope and pride and dignity and self-reliance. And a farmer who, you know, when a foreigner walks in to her yard, she looks you in the face rather than looking down when she talks to you. You know empowerment when you see it. And I saw it, and it changed my life. And I went from being Pablo, living my little Nicaraguan journey, to realizing that I had a calling to come back home and to see if I could take this European fair trade movement and transplant it in the US. And like any successful transplant, I knew it had to be adapted to very different market conditions here and very different consumer mindsets here. But that was my dream. And that's why I came back after 11 years in the field. And I knew I needed to learn how to speak English again, and especially the English language of business, the business language, and so that's why I came here. And I mean, I think they accepted me in the MBA program because I was so unusual. Like, they'd never seen a Nicaraguan revolutionary apply to the MBA program before, and I had the army boots and the mustache to prove it, you know, and so I got in, and I navigated those 2 years. I wrote the business plan for Fair Trade USA, the organization that I later started. I wrote it in my second-year entrepreneurship class. And the tools that I got here made me a better agent of change. So my dream when I came back was to launch the fair trade movement in the US, and that's what I've been doing ever since. We're coming up on 25 years now, and I never thought I would stay that long. I always thought I would go back to Nicaragua, where I belong, and go back to being Pablo $1. But it's been a crazy ride, and maybe I'll just spend a couple of minutes, with your leave, talking about Fair Trade USA and the state of the fair trade movement and the sustainable supply chain movement. And I love this, you know, I love our dialogue today, the local, and the global. I'm really excited to get into it with you guys. Let me tell you what fair trade is and how it works. So fair trade is a philosophy, trade not aid. It's an approach, but it's also a standard, right? You know organics. Organics has a standard, criteria that have to be met in order to pass an audit. Fair trade is the same way. So we have a 200-point checklist of social, labor, and environmental criteria that farms and factories have to meet in order to become fair trade certified. They pass an audit every year. If they pass the audit, they get certified. They get to wear the fair trade certified seal on their products. And the companies that we work with reward them and support them in doing that by paying a price premium. We're the only certification out there that guarantees a price premium. Organics has a price premium typically. It's a market-based. We actually have set premiums per product. For coffee, it's 20 cents a pound. For bananas, it's 2 cents a pound. For t-shirts, it's 3 cents a pound. Every product has a premium, which is aimed at getting farmers and workers on a journey to a living wage. So we're not asking farmers to be sustainable and figure that out on your own, and any costs associated with it, you cover that. No, we're saying the market will reward you for producing in a more responsible and sustainable way. That's the model. So my organization, Fair Trade USA, we develop the standards, we do the auditing and certification, we also have farmer training programs, we have consumer education programs, and we have an industry outreach program to try and get more companies to join. That's what we do. We're a nonprofit. 180 souls, $25 million in revenue. So we're small. But we have 66% consumer awareness now of that Fair Trade Certified seal. 66% of Americans recognize the seal and can tell you what it means. 41% of Americans say they bought Fair Trade products on an either regular or occasional basis. We have 1,500 brands and retailers working with us today, everyone from small local companies to Whole Foods, Costco, Kroger, Safeway, Target, Trader Joe's, even Walmart is doing fair trade products. I like to think of our organization as kind of at the skinny part of an hourglass. So above us is this market with 1,500 brands, with 66% consumer awareness, and last year with a total value of $10 billion. That was the value of fair trade products sold in the US alone last year with our label, 10 billion. And then we're in the middle, and our scope in terms of who we reach around the world now is over 1 million farmers and farm workers in about 62 countries, mostly in Latin America, but also in Asia and Africa, and now we're certifying here in the US. So one of the kind of key lessons of our entrepreneurial journey has been leverage. How do we leverage our small organization to generate impact on consumers and companies and on farmers and workers and ecosystems around the world? A key indicator of our success is the number of dollars that we generate that goes back to farmers and workers who are certified. So you'll recall I mentioned that companies we work with pay a premium. Not a big premium, but it's a premium, and it adds up. Last year we generated $100 million for farmers and workers, and last year we passed the $1 billion mark. So cumulatively, since we started, we've now generated $1 billion in additional wealth over market price for the farmers and the workers that we serve. And that, if anything that I've said today, deserves an applause. $1 billion. $1 billion. The coolest part of that is that it took us 19 years to generate the first $500 million. And in the last 5 years, we've doubled it. We've gone over $1 billion. So what that reveals, and now I'll finish because I think I'm running out of time. What that reveals to me is a shift in capitalism. There's an acceleration in the interest of business leaders in supply chain transparency, in supply chain traceability, in sustainability and responsibility, in purpose. And I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna because, you know, a lot of the time I'm angry and frustrated with the pace of change. But I've been doing this for a minute, and, you know, in the 30 years that I've been in the fair trade movement, I've seen a dramatic shift in the mindset of buyers and CEOs in mainstream companies with regard to the farmers, the workers, and the ecosystems in their supply chains. When I started, they didn't give a shit. They didn't want to know, and they didn't care. It was all about cheap labor and cheap products for people, you know, who don't want to pay for sustainability. And that has changed. Not for 100% of the companies, maybe for 20, 30, 40% of the companies. Today, companies realize that they can no longer afford not to care. And it may be because they want to mitigate reputational risk. Y'all remember Rana Plaza, 2013, a factory collapsed, 1,200 workers were killed. Our phone rang off the hook after that. We signed Gap, we signed Patagonia, because we don't just do food, we also do factory, we certify clothes. So yeah, some companies want to mitigate reputational risk by getting into sustainable supply chains. It's not about values, it's about managing risk. Okay, I'll take it. Let's go on the journey. I love working with values-driven companies. I mentioned Patagonia, but that, you know, I don't want to mislead. Patagonia is a values-driven company. I get to work with Patagonia, with Ben & Jerry's, with some great companies led by values-driven people. And that's cool. But we're not going to change the world if we only work with people who think like us. So I want to work with the mainstream. And the mainstream is coming to us because they want to mitigate reputational risk or because they want to strengthen the reliability and resilience of their supply chain at a time when social disruption and climate change is disrupting the supply chain. So we're doing a pilot right now with Walmart on tomatoes. It's only 10% of their total tomato sales, but that made Walmart the #1 seller of fair trade tomatoes in the world. And you know what we're tracking? We're tracking not only poverty indicators and poverty and well-being indicators on these farms with them, we're also tracking attributes like productivity and quality and worker retention. And what that revealed to us was their interest in having a stable, secure supply chain. They don't own the farms, but they want to lock in with farmers who are stable and secure for the long term so that they have greater reliability in their business. A lot of companies want to do fair trade and things like it because they want to put a seal on their package and differentiate themselves from other brands because they know that the conscious consumer movement is increasingly asking for more responsible and sustainable products. So regardless of which door they come into the sustainable supply chain platform, whether it's reputational risk or wanting a stronger supply chain or wanting to differentiate brand and tap into conscious consumers, it is clear to me that companies are coming into our space in food and beyond. And so I think of it as a 50-year transition in capitalism from the extractive, exploitative version of capitalism that I grew up with to a version that I expect y'all will see on your watch, which is a harmonization of people, profit, and planet. People, planet, and profit. I mean, the companies that are working with us are not taking a margin hit in order to do fair trade. They're selling their fair trade products or they're embracing fair trade and selling fair trade products in a way that is good for their company. You know, Michael Porter at Harvard calls it shared value. So it's not a redistribution of wealth. We're not taking money out of the pockets of shareholders and giving it to farmers. What happens with fair trade is that new value is created, and that's shared by all of the stakeholders. That's fair trade at its best. That's the challenge that we collectively have over the next 10, 20 years. We need to engineer models of business that generate value for the planet, for people, and for companies. It's not going to work to tell companies, you're too fucking greedy, you need to take a margin hit in order to save the planet. That's not going to fly, y'all. It's not going to fly. We have to be more creative and courageous than that. We have to generate models of business that generate value for the firm and value for the people and planet. And we can do it. We're creative enough. We can do it. There's so much evidence. This is not me, you know, and my wishful thinking. There's so much evidence that consumers increasingly care. And y'all Gen Zers and millennials in the room, you know, you index super high in terms of caring about the responsibility of the products you buy, more so than the boomers. So y'all go. You're a glimpse of our future. Go get them. Vote with your dollars. And when you get out of here, you can be an entrepreneur, you can be an intrapreneur in a bigger company, but carry the torch. It's on you. Thank you.
You know, I want to keep going. So there's a lot of good energy. So just stand up for a second, okay? And you'll be rewarded later because I brought oranges and Okra brought a whole bunch of fruit too. So just stand up, stretch for a minute, get your questions going in your head. And we're just going to keep going with the conversation. All right, everyone, please come back to class. So thank you both. Beautiful examples of reorganizing the system of supply around values and a vision. And I think you both exuded this sense of purpose in what you do, following that light, despite your mom not wanting you to necessarily be a botanist or a farmer because she was worried about whether you'd get a job. And I'm sure your mom was like, "You're going where?" Yeah? Yeah. So I just bring that up because I know in talking to a number of students recently in different office hour meetings that I've been having is they're facing that moment too, where they have to sort of declare independence from a narrative or an expectation of doing something. You know, you go to a prestigious university, getting a degree, put in all this effort. So I love how each of you talked about your point of embarkation. But one of the things, be fun to talk about, and I know Paul a little better than Okra, but just where you've had to persist through something you thought was going to be the end of your path. I'm sure, when you set out on bold missions, you come to moments where you ask yourself in the quiet of night, like, am I crazy? Is this going to work? Are all the forces against me? Can you recall a moment in your journey to just share where you might have confronted a moment like that and think about what came together to propel you through it?
Something comes up for me quick. The first thing that came up for me quickly was, so in 2021 or 2020, like a few months after the lockdown happened, I got a call from this woman in Sonoma County who was looking to support Black farmers and also had a land and capital and access and resources and stuff like that she was willing to put into a farm. And so she was like, "Hey, got this land, got these funds. Are you down?" And so I came through and worked at that project for almost 2 years, and we came to there was a political blockage, right? The city of Katati ended up outlawing, farming was actually illegal within the city limits. And so after reviewing all the zoning codes, reviewing all the information and seeing that it was actually not possible to continue with the project, even though all of the components were there, everything was there, everything was in full force. And to have to basically just stop and just put down everything and transition because there was no path forward, right? We went through a lobbying process with the city council. There was hearings that were held and things like that to do that. But that was a moment where I was like, I might just have to give this up. But and that's kind of what led me now into this position that I'm at with the DMC and just trying something new, right? Trying something, okay, I'm not selling food anymore. This is a different process that we're undergoing, trying to change policy and stuff like that. So that was a moment for me, and having everything that I had worked for, built up an organization, built up a financial structure, built up all these systems that were contingent on the land and the project, but having to physically step away from it because of political blockade. So I think that was a moment for me that I had to sit through. I spent a lot of time awake and a lot of time with no sleep, just trying to figure out what I was going to do and experiencing a lot of stress. But ultimately,
What would you do differently in the future?
In the future,
yeah,
I think I would have more of a reduce the speed at which I enter something, right? So there's a lot of learning that I still need to do, and whenever we enter a new land situation or whenever we enter a sacred relationship with earth space, it's important to really take time to look at all of the components around it, not just the production, not just producing food, not just producing a project, but there are so many different components around that.
the system.
In the system, right? The housing, the zoning codes, the people that are involved, the relationships that need to be built in order to make something like that happen, to build up infrastructure, to be able to have a livelihood, right? So I would definitely move at a slower pace and reduce the rapid amount of change that's happening in a landscape, while also building relationships and doing more research about what's happening.
That's kind of this course in a microcosm, because we're thinking about how do we see the whole system rather than just focus on, say, the production. How do we see the whole system? In your case, I'm hearing, gee, the one thing you didn't necessarily see up front, you had this beautiful offer, this invitation, these resources, but you didn't have freedom to operate effectively in that system politically. Thank you. Paul.
What's the question again?
Question was, and I was thinking about you when I asked this question. When you run into a challenge that you think was going to derail you, how did your entrepreneurial mindset and your core conviction kind of come together to pass through that? The moment you thought, I hit the wall, I can't do this anymore.
Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So Starbucks. We started in 98. We started certifying in 98. And the first companies that we were able to sign up here in the US were kind of really values-driven, pioneering companies, coffee companies that were already engaged in selling organic coffee and, like Thanksgiving coffee in Mendocino. So companies that already were practicing their version of fair trade, they were the first signers up. But I knew, and had even modeled this in my business plan before I ever started the venture, that there were kind of two paths to growth, the one without Starbucks and the one with Starbucks. Because we were starting with coffee, right? And Starbucks only had like 500 stores at the time. They were just becoming the cultural icon that they are today. They were just becoming the ubiquitous, you'd find one everywhere kind of company. They weren't yet in 98 there, but they were a shooting star. And so we knew that if we landed Starbucks, we were going to change the coffee industry forever and generate momentum that would pull others along. And so we started working on Starbucks. And in year 3 of the venture, in 2001, I want to say, we launched in 98. Yeah, in 2001, we got Starbucks to the table and got them to agree to launch one fair trade coffee. And before we signed, we went back to our stakeholders, not only some of the companies that we were working with, mission-driven companies, but also like the activists that had supported us. I mean, look, fair trade is a social justice movement embedded in the business world, right? So we had allies like Oxfam America and Global Exchange and, you know, activist organizations that were very skeptical of big capitalism, very skeptical of big companies. And we went back to them, we said, okay, well, we think we have a game-changing opportunity here to sign Starbucks, lend legitimacy to the model, and bring a whole bunch of companies along. What do y'all think? And it was like, are you fucking kidding me? You're selling out to the man. We knew you were selling out to the man when you went to Haas and got that MBA, and now we have proof. You want to sign Starbucks with one SKU, with one product? I mean, cool if you can get Starbucks to go like 50% fair trade or 100%. But, and by the way, one fair trade product was like 4% of their volume, which overnight would double our volume. So 4% of Starbucks was a lot of volume, but it was really the play, the chess move was the credibility and the entree to a mainstream audience. And I lost sleep over that, bro. Because my comrades, my kindred spirits, my people, my movement were scared and angry about the thought that we were going to engage with mainstream companies. And, you know, my team and I and the board, you weren't quite on the board yet, but you joined the board. So Will was on my board, y'all. That's the only reason why I'm here. I owe him a favor. No, seriously though, we all locked hands internally and said, we have to have courage of conviction here. We need to mainstream the fair trade movement. We don't have a right to keep this small. We don't have a right to only work with mission-driven, values-driven companies. We have to try and make it relevant for Starbucks, for Procter & Gamble, remember Procter & Gamble, and all these other companies. That's the only way we're going to impact 1 million farmers or 10 million or 100 million farmers down the road. And so that was kind of a turning point. And, you know, sadly, we lost some of our activist allies along the way because they started to see us as too mainstream. But I still think it was the right move.
Thank you. I want to invite any members of the class and the community to come to this mic or that mic. And if I don't see you at the corner of my eye, wave, okay? Because I'm looking over here. You want to come over? Well, if you come over, then the people at home and on the video can hear you, so.
I got you. I'm the mic boy.
Thanks, Paul.
Yes.
So I was, ooh, wow, loud. So I was wondering if you guys had a plan for entering like with the cannabis industry essentially, because they're not federally legal, but I can definitely see some really big fair trade issues already popping up. And even if it just gets decriminalized or just sent over to medical, I feel like there should be interference before the federal government starts to really crush down on costs for medical patients or lower standards.
Thank you.
That for me? You know, I wrote this quote down. Okra said that he wanted to be the dopest cannabis grower on earth. And I think when we start certifying cannabis, we're going to start with you, man. Look, I would love to start certifying cannabis. And I just think we have to wait until federal legalization. You know, not for any judgment that I have, but because of that fair trade certified label, which is acceptable right now in a whole lot of companies that are super conservative, like Walmart and Kroger and all these people. And I don't want to screw that up by alienating them, prematurely.
Right.
But do I care about labor conditions in the cannabis fields? Of course.
Do you have a plan though?
No, I don't have a clue. Will you help me?
Probably could.
All right, I got a card for you. Who wants the mic next? You can get out of your chair. You're on the corner.
To me anyway. Thank you. Yeah, I guess.
Can you introduce yourself too?
Yes. Hi, I'm Sachi. I use they them pronouns, and I actually graduated in December, but I'm just hanging out today. Thank you. Yeah, I think okra and deep medicine. You guys do a lot of work like with the immediate community. So you get to interface with the people who get to eat your food. So Paul, this question is actually for you. You said that you are able to like track the well-being of the farmers that you work with. So I was wondering if you can also, not to use the word track, but like kind of track the well-being of the consumers as well, because I feel like fair trade can be a little bit inaccessible pricing-wise, and there's a certain demographic who are able to participate in that way. So like figuring out, like I'm thinking about Walmart and like the people who shop at Walmart for their groceries, and like, yeah, maybe they can't afford fair trade tomatoes. So I was just wondering if you've been able to do that as well. Yeah.
So, I'm actually with him. I think food is a human right. And I dream of a day when food is available to everyone. Healthy food is available to everyone, whether they can afford it or not. In the meantime, hell yeah, I care about making fair trade food and fair trade products available to the mainstream and at affordable prices. And we often look to the organics industry as kind of a model for our journey. 20, 30 years ago, organic products were super expensive relative to conventional. Now that cost differential has come down, and it's much more readily available. You don't have to go to Whole Foods to get organics. You can also get it at Safeway. So same thing with fair trade. We're seeing the price to the consumer come down as the market matures and as more availability happens. For example, the Walmart tomato example. So they put that fair trade tomato out at the same price as the non-fair trade tomato. There's no difference. And when we ask them, why are y'all doing this? How are you able to sustain it? How is this even remotely sustainable? Because they're paying 5 cents a pound more back to the farm workers and farmers, right? So what are you doing with the nickel? Like, are you taking a margin hit? And their answer was, we're taking a little bit of a margin hit, but we have a more disintermediated supply chain here. We have a more direct supply chain. The fair trade growers have fewer intermediaries, and therefore they're able to pay more to the grower and not have to charge the consumer that much. And so I think that's the key to bringing the cost of fair trade products down to exactly the same as non-fair trade, is to look for opportunities to go more direct.
To integrate.
Right? To go more direct. Target last year launched fair trade blue jeans, women's blue jeans in the private label program for $19.99. And yeah, we have $200 fair trade blue jeans at J. Crew and Athleta, but for Target to get in on the game and find a way, and again, it was by creating a direct and traceable relationship with the factory, and they're able to deliver $20 blue jeans to the masses. So I love that. I think we're getting there. We definitely have that reputation. Oh, fair trade, that's for like elite folks and folks that can afford to pay more. But we're getting to a point now where we're seeing that come down. Thanks for the question. That's cool.
One of the qualities I see in effective entrepreneurs is this kind of persistent yet patient optimism, this long-termism, seeing that vision keeps unfolding and the commitment keeps growing with it.
Yeah.
But part of that is being able to convince people along the way. Like you had to convince Starbucks, you've had to convince people that what you're doing is meaningful. Like that idea of enrolling others in the journey to believe in what you see is really kind of an art form of. Can you talk about, how that is that innate in you? Is that something you've cultivated or nurtured? How do you think about always learning how to get better and more effective at that kind of inclusive enrollment that brings people along?
So I think it comes from really seeing people's spirits, right? Seeing people's ability, like what they are internally, right? We all are interested in a better world, or we all are, not everyone obviously, but many people, most of the people that I encounter globally are interested in improving their own conditions and seeing the conditions of their community and environment improving. So when I talk with folks, it's kind of from that standpoint, right?
So that's the shared part of it.
Yeah, that's the shared part of it, right? If I'm talking with people about, hey, this is something that I am doing, right? This food that we're growing is not only special and important because it's healthy, organic, and it's not being grown with exploitative farm worker conditions and things like that, but the energy and the energy that we're putting into the food and the intention that we're working with is powerful as well, right? And so people are also interested in participating in something that is larger than themselves and having an impact with something that's greater than they can individually impact on a day-to-day basis, right? So that's why people are willing to pay for stuff like fair trade. That's why people are willing to investigate into working conditions in different spaces and things like that. So if we can tap into that yearning and that understanding and want, then there's a bigger opportunity to like enroll folks in what we're trying to do, and specifically within the food system, right? And in the fiber system.
Thank you. I think it also starts with living the vision. Mm-hmm. People call it walking the talk. Mm-hmm. You see a lot of people, like I see a lot of people in entrepreneurship classes here that, they have an idea, it's kind of a quick idea, but they're not living it. They haven't journeyed into the work itself. It's more of a concept. So, Paul, when I hear your story going to Nicaragua for 11 years and living with the people in the system, that creates an enormous amount of both wisdom and credibility to be able to convince others that you're onto something.
Well, I don't know about the wisdom part, but maybe the credibility. Well, it's a cool question. How do we enlist others? And I like your answer, Okra, about giving people a chance to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And I think in terms of the way we engage companies in our movement, that appeal to values is meaningful. Because, most business leaders are not inherently evil. I used to think that, but I don't anymore. I think a lot of business leaders are put in positions where they feel like they have to check their values at the door before they come into work. Like they can't afford or don't have permission to be a values-driven leader because they're there to do a job, and ultimately the job is to maximize profits. And so at face value, something like fair trade looks like a dog because you're going to take money out of my pocket. You mean to be in fair trade, I have to pay more to the farmer? I'd like to do it. Sounds good. Sounds like the right thing to do. I just don't know how to make it work. And so for me, enlisting others is showing them how to make it work. And often that comes through the act of co-creation. So instead of selling fair trade to a company, we go in and we say, like Walmart and the tomatoes, how do we create a tomato program that's going to be good for the company and good for the consumer and good for the farmer and the ecosystem? And part of this disintermediation of the supply chain was one of the ideas that came out of that conversation. Because Walmart bought from suppliers. They had no idea where the farms were. They bought from suppliers who bought from aggregators who bought from farms. So we streamlined that. So the act of co-creation is a way to enlist people and give them a sense of buy-in and overcome what I think of as the trade-off mentality, which we are all, each and every one of us, going to face if we want to change the world. Far beyond fair trade, if we want to change the world, we have to overcome trade-off mentality. And what I'm referring to is this notion that either, as a business person, we can be profitable or we can be sustainable and responsible and ethical. But we can't be both. There's a trade-off. That's the old way of thinking. And what smart business leaders are finding is that sustainability and responsibility can actually drive the success of the firm. They go together. They can go together. And so that's what I was talking about earlier. Let's be courageous and creative in engineering these new models of business that are going to make it so. But helping business leaders see beyond trade-off mentality is a way of enlisting their support. And if it's consumers, the way to get consumers on board is the magic of an orange that comes from mindful consumption. Normally we just look at that orange, looks good, smells good, peel it, we eat it. We don't think about the grower. We don't think about the hands that harvested that orange or the ecosystem that was protected because it was grown in a sustainable way. That's my mission, to awaken the mindfulness of all of us around the things that we eat, to see the coffee farmer at the bottom of the coffee cup, and to realize that with something as simple and mundane as an orange, we can reach across time and space and help a farmer keep her kids in school, or help a community eat better. That's what we're doing with this food, right? We're helping a community eat better. You can make that happen by buying this product. It's a little different on your model, but that's my point. When you go to the grocery store, you can buy products that make a difference, and that is how we're enlisting consumers, by giving them a sense of the magic and the power to vote with your dollars for a better world, one orange at a time.
And so I think another thing about that too is like understanding that. Well, I'll go back to the energy thing too, right? Where it's like when we eat food, there's an energy associated with it. So if someone was exploited in that process, if you go and reach for a candy bar, imagine reaching for a conventional chocolate bar produced by, let's say, whatever large corporation that doesn't necessarily have any visibility or care about where their supply chain is coming from, more of the traditional corporations. There's an energy associated with it. When I touch a chocolate bar and when I see a chocolate bar like that with someone who has extensive knowledge of the food system, I see the exploitation. I can feel the exploitation. I'm just like being tapped in with the earth is like being tapped into the ethers and an entire different frequency and energy that is happening around us and mana that is happening around us on a daily basis, right? And so when we consume that and put that inside of our bodies, along with the pesticides, along with the chemicals, along with that, it's an additional component of the ingestion and consumption process. Because we're not just consuming the food, we're consuming the energy associated with that food. And when we consume food with good energy and with mindfulness and intention in its production process, then we also receive the benefits of that energy too. So I think that's from more of like the esoteric and spiritual component of agriculture and farming and things like that. That's not often spoken about in settings like this, right? A lot of people and a lot of farmers are deeply in tune with the energy and the forces of the earth and the spiritual component, right? That's why there's all these rituals around the world around the harvest. That's why there's all these rituals and song when people are planting, right? There's all these different things that are happening on a daily basis that is deeply entwined with the cultural process and the preservation of historical and ancestral lands. And so I think that's another component and thing that I'm trying to do as a displaced person, right? As a person whose ancestors were trafficked over here, right? This is where I ended up in this space-time continuum that I'm a part of right now. So I think that there's that component as well. And once we have a genuine and in-depth understanding of that energy, it's easier for us to make those decisions, right? Because not all food is free, right? We can't get free food all the time. When we have the opportunity to purchase something that's better, and I don't know, I make that decision, right? And I'm not saying that that's the end-all, be-all way, right, to consume food, but it's an opportunity for us to like be conscious of what's happening. And so, yeah, I try to infuse all the good energy into the food that I grow. I try to infuse whatever positivity and energy into the food, to whoever I'm feeding.
I so appreciate you giving voice to that.
Yeah.
I can feel it in you, the work you do with the land and the food, and I sort of know what that feels like as I've been spending more and more time in that, and it just completely changes your orientation to the way you see and perceive the world, and you do have to slow down. You have to go with the season and the cycles of nature, I think, to really appreciate and tune in that way. You were very beautifully articulate about that, so thank you. Where's that microphone? Is it floating around to somebody that wants it next? Max, you always have great questions.
Someone take this, please.
Who's got it?
Okay, I'm gonna put it back.
Maybe one more question down here, and then we'll share the bounty.
Yeah, that's good.
This is so scary. I don't know how to do this, so I'm just gonna hold it and stand here like super awkwardly. But basically, I'm really struck by how you guys have been able to sustainably live your values, because I feel like so many times I've seen people in my own life attempt at like really living their values, and then they just can't do it sustainably, and then they kind of have to like sell their soul and go work like a really horrible, terrible, exploitative job. And I've seen it multiple times. And so my first part of my question is for Okra, because you said you were CRS, and that's so awesome, and there's so much freedom in that program. So I'm really curious about how you structured your studies to be able to like now live a value-driven life. And then my second question is for both of you. I'm wondering if you have any advice for all of us who are about to go into the workforce and really just care about living in a way that is like resonant with who we are. And I'm gonna sit down.
You did great.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
Great question.
Thank you. So I think I drew from a lot of spots on campus, right? So the first courses that I took that like exposed me to entrepreneurship, I took some courses through the Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology to get an idea of how to run a business, right? And to how to do startups or whatever. We went to a startup accelerator in France and like learned how to like do accounts, like raise money, like get investors and communicate with people, do pitches, build a team and stuff like that. And so I was out there and I kind of I was interested in that. So that was one of the first upper division courses that I took. It was a study abroad program during summer. And after that, I kind of leaned into the plant and soil science aspect of it, right? So I started to learn more about plants. I started to learn more about medical ethnobotany. I took classes in IB. I took classes in ESPM. I took classes in African American studies to get a better read on my literature and writing skills, because a lot of this stuff that we're doing is communicating a message. We're communicating our vision. We're communicating and it's mostly in the written format. When we write a brief for a business, right? When we write something like that, that's a literary piece that we're putting together, that we're trying to draw people in with, that we're trying to communicate to people with. And so I thought about all those things as I was creating my area of interest study. So that, and I went to I was in a lot of labs. I looked at a lot of different laboratories and stuff like that. Learned from other graduate students and graduates from those labs who like went forward. But I guess to answer your question a little bit, like there's a lot of illusion that's happening, right? And what you mentioned, right, about you mentioned both of our parents and some our mother specifically. There's a lot of societal pressure that tells us that we have to do things that we don't necessarily believe in or that we don't want to do. But in reality, right, we're in an illusion of we have to be capitalists or we have to work these jobs or whatever, and we have to participate in this system as is, you know. There's many different options. Like Paul went to Nicaragua for 11 years and he didn't, you know, obviously we have to have some certain privileges financially to be able to do that, right? If we have a lot of student debt that we need to pay off, that's initially available. Like there's things that mostly have to do with financials, right? But if we kind of disconnect ourselves from a profit motive that's kind of put on us immediately as we enter the institution and as we exist in a capitalist system, we can kind of break these illusions down a little bit and just do what our spirit and our internal vision and our internal voice is screaming for us to do. And so that's like something that I've had to really listen to, especially like with patriarchy too, you feel me, and understanding about how that just tore up this little section inside of my body and my mentality around what I needed to do as a physical person that participated in this society. So I think that I had to do a lot of unlearning and breaking down and trying to figure out a pathway that was in alignment with what I was doing after I graduated, right? And I spent a lot of time in the dumps too, you feel me? I lived in a trailer for a minute, you feel me? I was homeless for a little bit, you know, just trying to make it happen. Like there's all these videos of like Master P on the Solange album. I don't know if y'all listen. Anybody listen to Solange up in here? Yeah. There's the interludes in there. Master P was like, I went around, I popped a trunk and was selling records out of my trunk. You feel me? And he was broke, living in his car for a while. And so like, just kind of thinking about people doing that just to like make a way and out of no way, making something out of nothing and just trying to like make that happen. And so I think that spirit is scary. That's scary to live in, and that's like not safe for some folks, you know? And so, but if we really just put all this conditioning and look past the illusion that's been put onto us, then we have more power. We can empower ourselves to move past that and move forward into something that our spirit's screaming for. So I think that's my answer for your question, and I'll pass it over to Paul.
I'm going to applaud that first.
Yeah, okay.
Because that takes a lot of self-knowledge and courage. And in my 40 years of being in an entrepreneurial journey, my kind of takeaway is about keeping your overhead low. If you keep your overhead low, you have a lot more flexibility. I mean, all your overhead,
Everything,
right?
Yeah.
Your spiritual, psychic, emotional, economic, keep all that low. Gives you a lot more capacity to operate and find your way.
Facts.
Yeah.
That's facts. Hey, write that down. Write that down. Yeah.
You have any advice, Paul? Final note tonight?
I feel a little uncomfortable giving advice But I'll tell you what I did. This is gonna sound so fucking cliche, you're gonna like not love it, but I followed my heart. And that meant figuring out what that was. And what I knew as a college student was I wanted to make the world better. I didn't have a specific sense of how I was going to do that, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted a life of purpose. And I knew that that was way more important to me than status and money and anything else, pleasing my parents. I knew that I wanted to have a life of purpose. And intellectually, I was interested, and emotionally, I was interested in farming folk. And I was kind of captivated by stuff I had read, like Food First, and agriculture overseas. So I just figured, I want a life of purpose, and I want to see if I can work with farmers. Might as well go to Nicaragua. I mean, it seems like a leap, right? But I didn't have it figured out at all. It was kind of a leap. But it was anchored in my sense of where my heart was and what I thought I wanted to do. And I felt pretty useless when I first got there. I didn't feel like I had skills. I felt like I was taking more than I was giving. I felt like I was learning more than I was contributing. And so I had to learn to be forgiving of myself for shit that I hadn't learned yet. You know, when you're purposeful or when you're driven by purpose, you want to make a difference. And you feel bad about yourself when you don't feel like you're making a difference. Be forgiving of yourself. Give yourself permission to learn a bit. Like a bit meaning a few years or more. You know, I think we change makers tend to be hard on ourselves. I also questioned what right did I have to go to a foreign country and fight their fight? You know? White boy playing revolutionary in someone else's country, well, who the fuck are you to do that? And I had to get comfortable in my own skin and comfortable with the fact that, yeah, it wasn't my country, but they welcomed me in and I was able to be a part of a process, married a local gal, contributed, started stuff, earned my stripes, stopped feeling guilty about not being Nicaraguan. It took a while. But, you know, that's analogous to whatever we do. We're all going to have imposter syndrome no matter where we go. Get over it. Try to get over it. Because we've got important work to do. We don't really have the right to like paralyze ourselves with things like imposter syndrome or what right do I have. Just do it. Just do it. I did not have it all figured out. I did not have my life's plan. I had no idea when I was 22 that I would be sitting in this chair at 62. I'm 62, bro.
I know. You look good.
Thanks, brother. I was fishing for that. No, seriously, it's just one step at a time, man. It's one step at a time. You don't have to have your life plan. Just take the next step. Just take the next step. And it might be the wrong one, but just take the next step. And after that, you'll know what the next step is. And after that, you'll know what the next step is. And it'll work out. It'll be okay. You just keep taking steps. And if you can follow your heart and stay anchored in your purpose, even if you have to make a tactical retreat to go work for a shitty job to earn money to pay off debt, if you still are looking for a way to find your way back to your path, you'll find it. I think. One more thing. One more thing.
Okay.
I know we're out of time. One more thing. It's impossible to be perfect. No matter how strong your values are and how strong your vision is, you're going to find yourself someday drinking out of a plastic water bottle. It's impossible to be perfect.
Be like that.
It's impossible to be perfect, y'all.
Be like that. Yeah, it does. It really does.
So, you know, just do your best and be kind to yourself. All right? That's all I got.
For real.
Hey, the plastic water bottle thing is real though.
You know, it's real. It's real.
Fucked up.
It
I
is,
know,
it
I know,
is,
man.
It is.
But Will gave it to me, so it's not my fault.
Exactly.
Because I pulled it out of a
real.
box behind the curtain because we have no water for you today.
I know. It's
We
all good.
failed.
Exactly. That's
But one
deep,
step
that's deep.
after another, one thing leads to another. Remember the first class? One thing leads to another. And this has been a magical evening. I want to thank Paul and Okra for coming. Join me in. I'm going to ask Jackie to come up and do the attendance and give you your